Peace, Israel, and Yah bless. Thy righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and thy law is the truth. I'm going to title this segment, Our Code. Our Code. The laws of Yah in full application by our people. So, there are a few things that we must deal with in the many nations in which we have been scattered. I'm just going to go through a list of them, and then I'm going to give you an overview of what it actually looks like in full application should we return back onto these laws, statutes, judgments, and precepts that we were given at first. One, we're seeing murders in our cities, and this goes both ways. This is us being murdered by the police unjustly, and this also goes for murders in the midst of ourselves, Israelites killing Israelites. So we're seeing the blood in the cities, the murders. Two, unemployment in our cities. Many of us are unable to find jobs, especially those of us who are not educated, not skilled, okay? Or worse yet, those who have been victims of the criminal justice system who becomes isolated, okay, and ostracized from actually taking part in the workforce. Three, overall crimes in our cities. Drug abuse, okay, the selling of narcotics, etc., etc. You name any type of crime, and we're involved in it because we do not have the resources. Okay, some of us are unable to work, so there's always a side hustle, so to speak, and it's usually something that's nefarious, something that's illegal that we tend to do to make ends meet, so to speak. Four, we have homosexuality, pedophilia, and sexual perversion in the midst of our cities, in the midst of ourselves. These are some of the curses that we would have problems within the midst of our household and our families throughout all the tribes when we have been scattered to the four corners of the earth. Five, disrespect of our men by our women and children. So we know that our men are disrespected because our men are supposed to be leaders, and our men have laid down and have not taken leadership, and thus it's hard for the women to respect the men, and the children also are disrespecting the men. Okay. Six, disrespect of our women by our children and by our men. So one, the men were being disrespected and are being disrespected by the women and the children, and then we're having disrespect of our women by our men and our children. So that creates problem within the household when dealing with the male to the female and the male or the female to their offspring. Seven, disrespect of our people by people of the other nations. Not only do we lack respect in the midst of ourselves, but for some reason, the other nations do not respect us at all, nor do they respect or value our lives. These are all curses that's been listed in Deuteronomy 28 and throughout the book of remembrance to validate that we are indeed the house of Israel. Point 8, the killing of our men and women in our cities. Now, not only are they targeting our males, but they are certainly targeting the females also. We have a large male presence in the prison system. What is being increased now is the females' presence in the penal system. So they're locking up more of our women. Okay, they've been locking up our males, and they're trying to get them the younger, the better. Okay, they're removing them off the streets and out of society, so to speak. Okay. Number 9, health problems among our people. Our people have all sorts of health problems, okay, more than anyone else, and we live shorter than anyone else. Okay, so we have to find ways and means to curtail the health problems that we're having in the midst of our people, and that goes for anywhere in which we live. We've already discussed the incarceration. They continue to do that at a higher rate. Let's discuss the distrust in the midst of our people. Our people are so mixed up. Our thought patterns are everywhere. Even though we may look the same, we're not on the same accord, because some are for joining with our enemies, some are for the separation from our enemies, some are for working in the midst of each other and building together, and others want no part of it. So as far as us being cohesive and being on one accord, that is a problem that we have currently. So we cannot get on the same page, because all of our people, even those of us living in the same state, the same city, the same nation, have different goals and view things quite differently. A lot of that have to do with the fact that we have intermingled and intermixed with the nations that have taken us captive. So we think like them and tend to approach problem solving with their mindset. And since we are not them, it doesn't work for us. Cleaving onto the ways of our enemies. We have taken a hold of their ways, their customs, and their gods, and we continue to hold on to them, even though we can go into the book of remembrance and show clearly that this is an idol. This is something that we were forbidden to follow or walk after. Yet, though the house of Israel is presented with this evidence, they refuse to hear it, they refuse to see it, and totally will turn their back against it. So they continue to cleave to Easter, to Christmas, to JC, and any other manner of abominable thing that we were clearly instructed not to do. A spirit of fear among our people. Our people are fearful, and there's reasons for that. Our men are made examples of and killed. Okay, and that's whether young or old. There's no regard for our youth, and there's no regard for our elderly. And any man who decides to stand up to defend and speak on the behalf of the house of Israel, he needs a double-edged sword. He has to fight his own people and also fight the enemies of his people. So it is a thankless job to be a leader or to take the role of leadership within the house of Israel. As it pertains to leadership in the house of Israel, if you have a room of 10 men and you ask who wanted to lead, no one will raise their hand. No one wants to lead. However, when someone does decide that he will take that mantle, he will take that leadership role, there are the 9 others who are against him, when they are also given the opportunity to step forward. So there are many of us who will not step forward, but will sit back and wait until someone does step forward, and once he does, we will be in total opposition to him, when those same people who are in opposition had the same opportunity to step forward and lead, but they were afraid. They don't want to lead. What they want to do is to sit back and attack the leader and criticize him in every possible way, while not giving any advice or help to solve the problems that we're facing. In other words, they're causing more problems by being a disturbance and being opposition to anyone that steps forth in a leadership position. All right. So these are some of the things that we are dealing with in the house of Israel as a whole. A whole lot of problems, a whole lot of plagues, a whole lot of curses that's upon our people. Now, we've heard about the Most High's law. We know that we're to return back to them. Now, what I want to give you an overview of is, what does it look like when we put this law in practical application? What does it look like? Should we start doing this and doing this in vast numbers? All right. The law in full application by our people looks like this. First of all, 1, remove ourselves from the worshiping of idols. If the house of Israel, in all the many nations where we have been scattered, turn to the Most High with our whole heart and whole soul, and face Jerusalem and confess our sins, and turn away from the idols of these many nations. Let's start off with Christianity. Let's start off there. If every person would, number one, take the crosses off their necks and chuck them, and take JC out of their house and throw them away, set it on fire, and no longer return back onto those church houses, those eminent high places, onto that idol, it will do a few things. Number one, the gathering of our people in one place to be lied to, that will stop. That's number one. The financial institution, and that's what it is a business known as the church, would halt, would come to an end. So the pastors and everyone else who are teaching these lies would be certainly out of business. The government now has no means by which to control the people, what they think, and what they feel. And I want you to keep in mind exactly how powerful that is. Once they can control your mind, they know exactly how you feel, because they've written it in the book how they want you to feel and how they want you to respond to certain things. So they will no longer have access to our people in a group setting, to which they can come to the pastor and have the pastor tell the people which way to vote. The pastor will no longer have the ability to have 501(c) tax exemptions, etc., etc. So it is a one hand wash the other type of setup. In order for the pastor to gain all these benefits, he has to teach a certain thing. And whatever it is he is teaching, it has to be in accordance with the government. And that's how he benefits. It is a means and ways of controlling our people. So as we start to remove ourselves from these houses of idol worship, now all of a sudden we are no longer thinking along the lines of those who have conquered us. 2, returning on to the dietary law. I have mentioned that we are sick, and our sickness is due to our diet. If we return to the dietary law in America, the house of Israel are the largest consumers of seafood. The Red Lobsters and all these other places that serve unclean food, we are the greatest consumers. We're in their pact. Shrimp, lobster, crab, scallops, fried catfish, etc., etc., etc. These are all garbage men of the rivers and the seas and the streams. They're not to be eaten. Leviticus chapter 11 makes it clear that we're not to eat anything that is within the rivers, the streams, and the seas that does not have both fins and scales. So, if we're to return back to the Most High's law, the pig industry will crash in about a week or two, less than 30 days. It will bring that whole pork industry to a halt. It will bring the entire seafood industry to a halt. And our people have been fleeced, have been taken advantage of, because we, unbeknownst to us, we are the biggest supporters of these industries and this system as a whole. Okay, so they benefit by our rebellion, and in most cases our ignorance. So if we were to return to the Most High's dietary law, we will see an increase in our health and an increase in our strength, and we will see a decrease in those who have the money, the monetary means by which to inflict harm to us. So by doing this, we'll crash the pork industry, we'll crash the seafood industry the minute we do this. Keep those things in mind. 3, return to the Most High's dress code. All the clothing that we buy is not made by us. They're brought in from overseas, made by other people, shipped here by other people. We do not own the textile industry, nor do we own the shipping industry, the big ships that bring these textiles back and forth across the seas. So When we decide to return back to the Most High's dress code, now when we go into the store to purchase any type of apparel, we're looking to make sure that it is 100% cotton or 100% polyester or 100% wool. We will not be buying anything that's 50% polyester and 50% cotton. We will not be buying anything that is of mixed linen. So therefore, all the stuff that's on the shelves, all the apparel that's on the shelves that we are accustomed to buying, they will not be able to sell. Moreover, what this will do for the most part is, since they will not be making clothing that specifically adheres to the Most High's laws, statutes, judgments, and precepts, that would force our people to start making our own clothes. So there we can start our own clothing industry where we are making garments, hats, pants, shirts, etc., adhering to the standard of the Most High, to where these clothing will have no such thing as blended and mended fabric. Okay, it will be 100% of whatever fabric that is, that piece of clothing would be. So there opens an opportunity for us to start our own business to cater to our own sales. Okay, but as we turn to the dress code of the Most High, a lot of these manufacturers of clothing, there will be a whole lot of clothes that they will not be able to sell because we won't buy it. And we are a large base consumer of clothing. Keeping the Most High's Sabbath. If we are to keep the Most High's Sabbath, one thing that's going to happen. Imagine when all the heathen goes to the mall Friday night and they look around and there are no quote unquote, we are Israelites, but we're termed and called black people in the many nations. What happens when the heathen goes to the mall, goes to the store, and goes everywhere else, and Saturday night there are no black people out? They're not in the streets. They're certainly not in the workplace to work there on the Sabbath day on Saturday, and those people are just not around. You see, our enemies hate us, but their very survival depends upon us. Their food industry, their clothing industry, etc., and their textile mills, etc., their factories. So, as we turn to the Most High's law, statute, judgments, and precepts, and we decide we're going to keep the Most High Sabbath day, all of a sudden, whatever you were selling, your alcoholic beverages on Friday nights, we're going to crash that. All your club money that you would have made that Friday night, we're going to crash that. All the sales, all your sales normally at your stores, at department stores, are normally, your Saturday sales, so to speak, your Friday sales. So your monies from your retail stores that we would have been spending on the Sabbath day, all of a sudden, that's going to dry up. So from an economical standpoint, should we return back to the Most High's law? Should we turn back to number one, stop worshiping these idols? It's going to dry up the church money. We return back to the dietary law. It's going to kill the pork industry. It's going to kill that chicken farming and the chicken industry. It's going to kill the fish industry with all the unclean meats that they sell to our people that we consume, and we are the number one consumers of this filth. Us returning back to the dress code is going to hurt the clothing industry. And us returning back to the Most High Sabbath is going to hurt, number one, is going to hurt the factories because we will not be there. And it will hurt any business that does sales from Friday evening to Saturday evening. We won't be present. So imagine going to the mall and there's no black people around. Do you think Caucasians won't notice this? Do you think Asians won't notice this, and everyone else? Where are these people? And as we return back to these laws, statutes, judgments, and precepts, and we start to do them, you will clearly understand how concerned these people are with anything that we do. All right. Point 6 would be simply returning to all laws, statutes, judgments, and precepts. As we do that, as we return to all the Most High's laws, statutes, judgments, and precepts, what we will find a reduction in crime. Because as we return back this law, statute, judgment, and precepts, we understand clearly that to murder another man is a sin. We understand clearly that our brother is the apple of the Most High's eye. He is a son of the Most High. And once we understand that my brother is a son of the Most High, the last thing I'm going to want to do is kill a man of the Most High. So therefore, you will see a reduction in the violence in the midst of us. We will love our own people. It will be a removal of the hatred in our families. It will be the removal of the pedophilia that we see and all the other uncouth things that we see as far as sexual perversion in the midst of our people once we start to walk within the laws, statutes, judgments, and precepts of the Most High. If we're following the laws, then therefore the police have no reason to afflict us and arrest us because we're walking within the confines of the Most High's law. And as they seek to do this more and more in unrighteousness, as we try to separate ourselves from them, the Most High will certainly step in on our behalf. So this is not a battle that we will be fighting alone. Point 7. We'll teach the laws to all Israel and also to the stranger of a contrite spirit. So as we start to do this, each and every one of us, it is our responsibility to teach this law to all the house of Israel, to anyone that you know, including the children, and we are also to teach this law to those of the other nations who are of a contrite spirit. Not every nation is against the house of Israel, and even of the nations that are against the house of Israel, they are a small percentage of those people who will seek after the Most High's righteousness. So we are to teach this law not only to the house of Israel, we are to the house of Israel first, but we are also to teach this to the stranger that is of a contrite spirit. So we do have some allies in the midst of the nations, though not all, and a very small percentage. Okay? As all Israel returns back unto the Most High's law, it will put us all on one accord. Being on one accord will do what was prophesied in Ezekiel. The house of Israel, both northern Israel, and southern Israel, which would be Judah and Samaria. Judah is actually in the south. We have Samaria and Israel in the north. So Judah and Jerusalem is down south. And we'll take the north and the south and bring those two sticks together as one. And the only way we can be on one accord is if we have one law. So regardless of where we live in the earth today, we all have access to the book of remembrance. We all have access to the Most High's laws, statutes, judgments, and precepts. As we return onto that, what we cannot do, we cannot be for the Most High's law and be for joining with the other nations. So it's going to be one or the other. And for us to return to the Most High's law, we have to remove ourselves from the ways, customs of those who have oppressed us. So regardless of what nation we are in, we're going to have to totally separate ourselves from those among us and around us if we're going to take a hold of the Most High's law. And that puts us all on one accord. Where that becomes frightening to many is that it has been a specific mission for our enemies to keep us as far apart as possible. Regardless of what continent or landmass we live upon, it was imperative that those who have taken us captive ensure that we were not able to communicate at all. And now with this internet, we're able to speak to the Israelites in Africa, the Israelites in South America, the Israelites in Central and Latin America and the Caribbean and in Europe and in Asia and everywhere else where we may dwell. So this is a means of communication for us to share this law, statute, judgments, and precepts, and to encourage each other to do it. With that said, As this internet and the returning of the Most High, returning back onto the Most High's laws become a theme for us, and we start to do this in mass numbers, I want you to understand that this medium known as YouTube and as the internet, this is not something that we control. So while we're still able to share this information and put these videos up, I want you to understand that part of war, okay, when you're dealing with combat, the first thing is to knock out the communication of your enemies. So we are in the midst of our enemies. They are enemies unto us. They're enemies unto the Most High. So I want you to understand, as we begin to strengthen in this law and we begin to build the bridges between the Israelites of North America and the Israelites of South America, the Israelites of South America and the Israelites of Africa, the Israelites of Africa and the Israelites in Europe and Asia, etc., as we start to build these alliances and return back onto the Most High's law, I want you to understand that our enemies will cut this medium. They will cut this communication line, because that is combat. If I'm fighting you and I can cut you off from keeping in communication to where you can strengthen up yourselves and resupply yourselves, etc., 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 that's what I'm going to do. So understand that our enemies, they are going to cut this communication. Okay, so you are to download what you can, save it, and to share this as much as you can, for they will cut it off. It's just a matter of time. All right, next point, the value of our lives. As we start to remove ourselves from what has been taught in these churches and return back to the Most High's laws, statutes, judgments, and precepts, once we clearly understand that no one has ever died for us, then we stop having this 9 lives mentality. The 9 lives mentality would be, hey, if I've got 9 lives, it's not a big deal for me to give up 1 or 2 of them. I still have six more to go, or 7 more to go. We have to understand clearly, once we go into the laws, statutes, judgments, and precepts, and we get a clear understanding that you live forever through your children, and the only one that lives forever is the Most High, then we understand that the life that we're living right now is precious. We no longer will subscribe to the notion that I'm to let the man kick me in the face, and when he does that, I'm to turn and let him kick me on the other side of my face, in hopes of me listening to him and obeying him. I'm going to have a better position in heaven after I die. That is one way to keep a man docile. As we understand that this life is but one time, it is a one-time shot. We continue after this through our children. Once we get a clear understanding of that by returning to the Most High's law, then our lives become precious, and therefore anyone that tries to take it will fight for it. And that's a mindset that they never wanted us to have. So understand, you have one life to live. There is no second chance after that. There is no you dying and going to heaven. None of that nonsense is true. So understand, here and now is where you stand for your life, for you will only have to do this once. And with that mindset, it changes how a human being responds once his life is on the line. Okay, that puts the spirit of a fighter in you. You're not going to just lay down and give up your life, for you know it is all that you have. It is most precious. As we understand that, then we will also think twice to take the life of another Israelite. So that goes both ways. All right. Now, the lies. As we pull away and separate ourselves from the teachings of the heathen, their lies will no longer be of effect. They have lied to us in every way, shape, and form to control us. That's number one. One is to control us, and two, to lead us as far away up as possible from returning to the Most High. So as we separate ourselves from them, They no longer have the ability to influence how we think, how we believe, and how we respond to certain things. So their lives will be no more as we separate ourselves from them. That's why we're to be in the Most High's law day and night, because as we read the law, statute, judgments, and precepts of the Most High, it is counter to anything that the heathens teach, and it's counter to anything that they do. So as we pull ourselves away from them, then the Most High will then stand for us, because we are moving towards his law, statutes, judgments, and precepts, which now puts us under his protection. As we become and come under his protection, then we will no longer seek towards our enemies for help. We will understand clearly that Yah is our only help. Now, removal of trust in vanities. As we are spread into the midst of these nations, we have placed our trust in many vanities, many lies. We've placed our trust in Christianity. We've placed our trust in JC. We've placed our trust in money. We've placed our trust in the Constitution. We've placed our trust in marching. We've placed our trust in the court and the justice system. We've placed our trust in the American dream. We've placed our trust in politicians. We've placed our trust in the policemen. We've placed our trust in the clergy, etc., etc., etc. All of those things which we have placed our trust in has failed. Why? They are vanities. They are lies. They're things where therein there is no profit. So these things are profitable for naught. They are worthless. So as we return to the Most High's laws, statutes, judgments, and precepts, we will no longer be chasing after money. We will no longer be placing our trust in JC. We will no longer place our trust in the Constitution. You have to keep in mind, we are the house of Israel. We have been conquered by our enemies and taken to the four corners of the earth. In the many nations where we live, our enemies, it is their language that we speak. Our enemies, it is their currency that we use. Our enemies, it is their laws that we have to abide by. When we go before the court system, chances are one of our enemies is the judge. Chances are one of our enemies is the judge. Now, when you go to a court system that's set up by your enemies, your enemy is the judge, and your enemies wrote all the laws, you can expect that you will lose. So we continue to turn to our enemies for justice when our enemies are the ones that wrote the justice system. That is how far removed from common sense we have become. And that is part of us being deaf and blind. We've been made dumb. So we have been seeking all types of help from those who have shown time and time again that they are not helpful to us in any way, shape, or form. Now, in doing these things, Yah will deliver us out of the hands of our enemies. It will be made clear to all the people of the earth who his people are. So, as we pull away from all the nonsense that we have been taught in these many lands, and we start to return back unto the Most High's law, it is only then that the Most High said he will return and gather us. Now, I want you to keep a few things in mind. Our conditions at the present time is not unbearable. It is unpleasant, but not unbearable. We were able to get through slavery. We were able to get through Jim Crow, Reconstruction, civil wars, and all other manner of wars that this nation has fought, and the world wars, etc., because we're fighting on many fronts. We're fighting in the midst of our own household, and we're fighting our enemies who have captured us. So we're constantly in a struggle from day to day. Now, as we do this and return back onto the Most High's law, His statutes, judgments, and precepts. We have a few things that we have to certainly understand. Number one, the nations are going to understand clearly who we are, that we are his people, and they're going to know this simply when he rescues us or separates us or sifts us from the midst of them. Now keep in mind, he cannot separate us from the midst of these people if we continue to cleave onto these people. So we have to separate ourselves certainly from them in order for him to return and gather us. Now, as I was saying previously, our current circumstances are not unbearable. We were able to go through slavery and everything else up to this point. We're still alive. We're still here. And some of us actually believe that they're doing great. So, in order for us to be delivered out of this great trouble that's going to come onto the house of Jacob, it has to be an unbearable thing. It has to be, this is so bad that the Most High is going to have to come and get us. It's going to be that bad. So, we're not there yet, but all the indications are showing that we're headed in that direction. As I've stated earlier, as you look at all of these things that I've just listed out, as we return back to the Most High's law, just by us doing that, it can make this nation go broke. You may not believe that, but I want you to understand that you are a major part of its economy. You're a major part of its success. You are its success. That's why when there's any problems here, they want to beg you to pray. They know exactly who you are from a spiritual perspective. So when they're crying, they always want you to sympathize and to say a prayer for them or with them. And we're going to stop doing this. So we certainly know that if we return to these laws, it's going to make a certain and economic dent on this place. Now, what is happening is the many nations are turning their backs on this place because they are understanding that they are funding their own demise. Let me explain. Russia, China, Japan, those three nations, and Korea, they hold a large amount of U.S. debt. I don't know if you're familiar with the stock market, but if someone starts a company, they may offer shares. When the company hits an IPO, initial public offering, they are selling stock to the public. As the public buys these shares, that's how the company gains wealth. They can then use the money of the purchased shares to, for R&D development, to hire new talent, to put new products in the pipeline, etc., etc. So their money, their funds, is determined by exactly how many people buy into that company. And if no one buys into that company goes broke. It ceased to exist. So what has happened? The United States is a company. And the many nations of the earth, Russia, China, North Korea, Japan, Australia, England, and the rest of these nations, they have bought into the United States. They hold its bonds, its treasury bonds. And a bond is nothing but a loan. That's what a bond is. So a nation may say, hey, I'll give you 10 billion and you may give me 10.5 billion in a year's time or 2 years time, etc. So it all depends on the time frame. So what is happening now is that the many nations who have taken stock in America, they are now selling their stock. They're now selling their treasury, U.S. Treasury bonds. They're dumping them. Okay, so now as they dump these bonds, what's happening is that not only are they dumping them, they're dumping them and they're not buying new ones. So they're taking all the U.S. debt off of their books. All right. Now, as they do that, it decreases the value of the US dollar. So what they're doing, they're slowly bankrupting the nation, and many people are unable to see it. So China has, I want to say, 2 trillion, holding 2 trillion of the US debt. China is unable to dump all of this money at once, because if they do, it will be to their own hurt. So they have to do it systematically while the BRICS nation is being well established. So all the nations are securing ways in which to literally circumvent the use of the US dollar. Many of them are no longer using it. Many of them have turned their back on this place and are not putting sanctions on nations that the US government is encouraging them to put sanctions on. So you're seeing a total reversal as far as, instead of the nations being with this place, they're turning their backs against it. And they're turning their backs against its currency. So as this continues to happen, you will see and feel the effects here in this nation when all these tariffs begins to hit. And the children of Israel will feel this the most. Now, when things are going wrong here, there has to be somebody to blame. And that blame will be placed upon the children of Israel. So as these nations start to realize, okay, the reason why you're able to fight all of these wars and have all of these bases everywhere is because we're buying your treasury bonds, and you're using this money in which to fight these wars. So what we're not going to do is, we're not going to buy your bonds anymore. We're not going to use your money anymore, because fighting wars are not cheap. So all of a sudden, if you cut off an arm or two, then all of a sudden that individual can't reach as far. So it's going to curtail the military actions of this nation, because its budget is going to be restricted. So as you see that happens with the rest of the nations, imagine as those purse strings gets tighter, what happens when we here in America and other places decide that we are going to withdraw by not buying your unclean meats, not buying your clothing that's of mixed linen, not working on the Sabbath day, not coming out and buying anything on the Sabbath day. We're not supporting your cause. We're not spending any money at Christmas, because we understand that that's a pagan lie. We're not spending any money at Easter. We're not taking part in Halloween. We're not taking part in any of these customs. That hurts you financially. So it will be a double attack. It will be the nations attacking financially by selling their treasury bonds, not buying anymore, and not using the US dollar as a major currency, especially when dealing with oil. And then you have our people in the midst of the many nations who start to withdraw themselves from these many nations by walking after the Most High's law. Think of how you're going to be received. Think of how you're going to be perceived when you start to do this. You're seeing the situation in South Africa, where our people are now getting ready to take that land back, take their land back from those who have murdered their ancestors and have stolen that land. Now, if you got the land by bloodshed and murder, that's exactly how that land is going to be taken back. Bloodshed and murder. And it's going to be the bloodshed and the murdering of those who took it that way. The Most High said every man's way will be returned upon his own head. So if that was the way in which you got it, that's exactly the way in which it will be taken from you. And unlike all the Israelites that scattered to the four corners of the earth to understand this, South Africa, the apartheid in South Africa could not have gone on for the length of time that it did if the US didn't back it, if England didn't back it, and all the other European nations. They were never in opposition to this. because that is their history and that is their track record. What you're seeing going on in the Gaza Strip and what's going on in Israel as a whole would not be possible if it was not backed by the U.S. government and backed by the European powers. That is their history. That is what they do. That is what they have done. So, if you think for 1 second that what's going on in South Africa, and they're going to kill those people over there. I've seen a clip on YouTube where they're actually Israeli commandos are teaching the South Africans, the white South Africans. There's no such thing. They're Europeans. They're Dutch. They're English and they're wherever else. They're not nothing. They're not South Africans at all. These are European colonizers. So the Israelis are teaching them how to protect themselves. The commandos are. That's only fitting. They're the same bunch of people. And they have the same mindset. And that would not have lasted that long if it was not backed by those European nations, just as they're backing the same apartheid that's going on in Israel right now. So don't think for 1 second that the Africans in South Africa, and as they do this and take their land back, and rightfully so, and it's going to be taken by violence, because those who took it by violence. So their way must be returned upon their own head. As they do that, do understand that that's going to spread throughout Africa. It won't just happen in South Africa and that's it. All those other lands are going to start taking their land back. And they're going to take it in the same means by which those who took it before. So, do you really think that they're going to allow that to happen? And it's going to happen. Will they allow us, those small percentages of us scattered in the Western Hemisphere, to just walk around and do what we normally do on a daily basis? If the Africans in Africa kill those Europeans, who are killers anyway, and thieves and liars and colonizers, if they kill them, and they will, and take their land back, land that belongs to them, do you think that these European nations are going to allow us to just walk around and conduct ourselves and our business the way we have, while in Africa, Africans are slaying Europeans wholesale? And that's going to happen. Do you think they're going to let us just do that? They're not. So that's going to be part of this great trouble that we're getting ready to face. I expect these people to come against us wholesale in vast numbers. And as that happens, because they will be stripped financially, they won't have the money to fight the wars, there has to be a scapegoat. Someone has to be blamed for all of this. And usually the blame is placed upon our people. So when times get hard, once this man is stripped of his ability to fight wars, he has no money, he has no factories. Okay, if he has no factories, he has no means and no way of feeding us. So as the Most High strips him and takes away his financial means, he can't fight wars. And if he can't fight wars because he has no money and he has no factory, then he doesn't have a job for us to go to. And if we are unable to work for our oppressor, what that simply means is we are no longer needed by him. And those he doesn't need, he discard of. So that's where this great trouble is going to begin. It's going to begin when this man has nothing and he is stripped. He's unable to feed us and do anything to take care of us, because he won't be able to take care of himself. And so we're going to see that God that he has given us will fail him. And that will make it plain to us why it has failed us for 400 years. And that will be something that will be unbearable to our people in all the many nations which we dwell. And in that great trouble, is where we will turn upon the Most High, and he will gather us out of these nations where he scattered us. That's when that great trouble begins. So in order for him to come back and get us, it's going to be unbearable. And right now, we have gotten used to all manners of cruelty, and we seem to turn a blind eye when we're abused. Okay? And like I said, it's going to be unbearable. And so we are to look for these things. Keep an eye on all your current events. Look at what's going on with this nation. And look how it's being perceived and received by the other nations. Our only way out is to return to the Most High, His laws, statutes, judgments, and precepts. And as we do this, he will take our enemies and bring them low speedily. Okay, it will be a fast forwarding of the process of bringing them down to the ground, their pomp, their arrogance, etc. So us returning to this law, all it's going to do is going to make them come against us harder and stronger. But when they do, the Most High will stand up for his people. So we shall see. The Most High and his prophets have laid out specifically what we are to do and the things that we are to look for. So let's go ahead and get in this book, Return to the Most High's Law, Statutes, Judgments, and Precepts, and he will prove to us that he is exactly who he says he is. So put this law in full effect, because once you start to do this in its practical application, you will see that it will bring the nations that we are in, regardless of where we are on the earth, as we return to this law and puts us all on one accord, it will bring these nations to their knees. Easier said than done. Let's do it and see exactly what happens. Thy righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and thy law is the truth. Return to the Most High's law, that he may take these nations and their idols and crush them. Peace, Israel, and Yah bless.